Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics on this weekend where we mark 20 years since the terrorist attacks on New York and Washington, D.C. But we start with the new fight over COVID-19 vaccines and specifically that call for employer mandates to be vaccinated. By now, you've almost certainly heard President Biden on Thursday laid out his new 6-part plan to stop the pandemic. Now, one part of that plan, companies with 100 or more employees would be required to have their workers vaccinated or tested weekly. It also calls for more help from schools, hospitals, and small businesses. But the vaccine mandate has dominated the discussion. The president also has a message for critics planning to challenge the mandate.
Have at it. Look, I am so disappointed that particularly some of the Republican governors have been so cavalier with the health of these kids, so cavalier with the health of their communities. We're playing for real here. This isn't a game.
Count Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb among those not supporting the president's plan. He says vaccines are the #1 tool to fight against the pandemic, but that the vaccine mandate announcement is a bridge too far. Private businesses, he says, should be able to look at their own mission, their staff, and their goals and make the decision best for them that will keep their doors open. He goes on to say, I believe it is fundamentally a citizen's right to choose whether or not to get the vaccine. While I wish everyone would get the vaccine, we are a country built on this exact type of freedom. I want to show you now the Indiana Democratic Party's reaction to this. The party's executive director says President Biden provided a blueprint once again to help Indiana put COVID-19 in the rearview mirror. If Governor Eric Holcomb refuses to show leadership on the pandemic, he'll show that he cares more about the Indiana Republicans' extreme partisanship and future ambitions than saving lives. Now, we also talked with our own Wish TV medical expert and former Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams. We specifically asked him if he thinks an employer-based vaccine mandate would boost vaccination rates.
Well, it absolutely makes it more likely for people to get the shot. I've always said that your boss or your workplace telling you to do something is going to have a greater impact and be met with less resistance than a governor or a president or an elected official telling you to do so. But here's my concern. And to anyone who is a manager or in the executive offices of a workplace, we need to make sure we're getting people's questions answered. It's not just about saying you're going to do it. It's about helping people get their questions answered so that hopefully they're doing it, and they're doing it because they realize it helps them and it helps their community.
Meanwhile, Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita preparing a potential court fight over the mandate. He says that he's working with other like-minded attorneys general to review all legal action on how to stand against these authoritarian actions by the Biden administration. Goes on to say, we will be prepared to file suit if Biden seeks legal action restricting Hoosiers' liberties. Coming up, the push to tighten voter laws around the country and the security of Indiana's elections. I go one-on-one with the Indiana Secretary of State next on All Indiana Politics. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics. We turn for the moment to the growing fight over voting rights and voting restrictions. It starts with a new law in Texas. The state's governor signed the controversial new law this week. It includes bans on 24-hour-a-day voting and drive-through voting. The Justice Department suing to block it from ever really taking effect. In Washington, D.C., the Senate is also set to take up the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill, one that would restore parts of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Let's welcome in Secretary of State Holli Sullivan. Madam Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's start by talking about the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill, if you don't mind here. It's passed in the House, moves on to the Senate. You've spoken publicly against it. Why?
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, HR 4 is quite honestly the second attempt by this Congress, this Democrat-controlled Congress, to take away the local elections from our states and create a federal election and in this legislation, in HR 4, it's even more drastic by creating a new bureaucratic position at the DOJ called more or less the czar of elections, where this unelected official would then have the ability to look at past and future election laws in each and every state and make judgment and put their input into those laws. So basically taking away the state's right to run their elections and putting that into the federal bureaucratic hands of somebody that's not elected by the people of this great nation.
You know by now that some people are going to watch this, they're going to say, hey, why not have the federal government overlook our elections?
I would share with you that the Hoosier spirit and my travels across this great state are very, very centered around the fact that Indiana's stellar reputation across this nation for election security, integrity, is because Hoosiers run Hoosier elections. And the pride that Hoosiers have in the confidence when they go to vote to know that all legal votes in Indiana count and are counted in a very timely fashion are because Indiana runs Indiana elections, and those local election officials that Hoosiers get to hire at the polls as their county clerks and election officials are the ones that run Indiana's elections. And HR 4 is an unprecedented, another attempt by our federal government to take those rights away and to take those voting rights away and make some uncertainty around our voting laws in the state, which we all know around uncertainty becomes where confidence issues come in, and we're going to lose voter confidence. And when that happens, Hoosiers would stay home and not have the confidence to show up at the vote. And that's the exact opposite of my role as your chief elections officer. I take it very seriously to message to Hoosiers what our election process is, how they can have their input into our process, the transparency around the Hoosier process. There are many states around this great nation that call us and want to make their election laws exactly like Indiana's, where we've had a steady hand on the wheel for many years, and Hoosiers trust the process in which they used to vote in Indiana.
Another state that we could talk about today, of course, is Texas, the new voting laws that went into effect this past week. And I want to be clear here, the law puts new limits on certain types of voting, including drive-through and 24-hour voting. Do you support that law?
You know, Texas law that was passed, well, actually, I think it was signed today by their governor, has over 80 pages. I'm going to be very honest, I haven't read the 80-page bill in Texas. I know that it has over 10 different items in it. And the two that you mentioned, Indiana doesn't participate in. And so I don't really have a comment on that. I know they're trying to make their elections more secure. I can tell you that our legislative session this last year, where we grew the amount of days in which Hoosiers can vote. We have a very accessible voting process here in Indiana. We should be very proud of that. We grew from 28 to 29 days. I called it voting season now, as far as early voting for Hoosiers before Election Day. And we should be also very proud of the fact that we were one of the first 8 states to allow voter ID, voter registration online many years ago. So we've been, like I said, a steady hand at the wheel where Hoosiers can truly trust the process in which they vote in Indiana.
Should Indiana consider a similar bill?
I think Indiana has already set the standard for election law, currently in law right now. And I believe states like Texas and others are truly trying to get to where Indiana already stands very firm in their election process and the transparency around it. So I would say we're already there, and Texas is trying to be a little bit more like Indiana.
As you mentioned earlier on in this interview, you've been heading up a voter registration campaign. I want to remind the folks at home, we're talking about postcards that have been arriving in the mail. So explain a little bit more about that if you can.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. That's an extremely important part of the process and the transparency around how we run Indiana elections. Right now, we're going through a voter list maintenance. Some people would call it a voter list refresh. And what it is Hoosiers around the state, 4.4 million postcards were sent out from the Secretary of State's office. So those are legit. They came from my office. They're a white postcard, small black ink, and it shares your voter registration information that the state currently has. And if that is not correct, it shares with the voter how to update it at indianavoters.com, or how to mail that postcard back in. And what it also allows us is the chance to get those that are maybe sent to a wrong address. During COVID, a lot of Hoosiers moved. So we need to have those address updates. And when we get a returned postcard, which we got, and let me get you the right number, we got 418,000 of those returned to our office already. That gives us a chance to update with the USPS, the US Postal Service, what the forwarding address is and try a second attempt to that voter. If we get that card back, those voters then go on an inactive list. That does not mean those voters cannot vote. They absolutely are still allowed to vote in the state of Indiana. It just puts them on a list so that when they come in, they can share with us their updated voter registration information. We can get that logged and we can get them updated in indianavoters.com. But Hoosiers can know now that they can go anytime to indianavoters.com, use their ID to update their address after moving, or maybe they got a postcard and they're John Smith Jr., but their postcard said John Smith Sr., and they just want to update and understand to make sure that their voter registration is current. We also had some Hoosiers that left the state or maybe left a county, and we want to make sure those things are updated. Voter list maintenance is very important to our local elected officials as well. It's a cost-effective measure. We want to make sure that we're not over budgeting for local county elections when we get to those elections in 2022. If we have people on the rolls that don't live in the county anymore, then we could inadvertently order too many voting machines, which is very costly, and other types of needed technology around voting equipment. But it's also a voter confidence issue, and that's extremely important. We want to make sure that when voters show up to vote, they know that those lists are up to date, and only the registered voters in Indiana are voting in Indiana on election day.
So to be clear, this is something different than we've seen in other states. You don't need to do something very specific to stay on the registration, right?
Correct. You only have to update it if something is wrong with the information that we share with you.
There we go. Okay, Secretary of State Holli Sullivan, thank you for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
And coming up, we turn back to the president's plan to boost vaccination numbers, including the vaccine mandate. Our political experts talk potential backlash next on All Indiana Politics. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome back Abdul Hakim Shabazz, publisher of IndyPolitics.org, and Laura Beck, longtime Democratic strategist. Good to see you both. I think we have to start with President Biden's new plan to stop the spread of COVID-19. Abdul, I want to go to you first. Was this speech and this mandate the right thing from President Biden right now?
Well, there's sort of two parts of this. There's the legal part and then there's the political part. The legal part, I think the president actually is acting within his legal authority that Congress authorized him to have through OSHA, the Federal Administration Agency. Politically, I'm still, the jury's still out on this one, to be brutally honest with you, because it would be nice if people just go ahead and get vaccinated. But we're at a point now with the spread of COVID-19 and particularly the Delta variant and then the MU variant that's sort of behind that, that they've got to do this. But it would have been nice had the president maybe sort of work with people a little bit more to get this done. But like I said, the jury's still going to be out on this one for a while.
Laura, your reaction to his speech yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the fact that Indiana is once again on fire, I mean, when you look at our numbers, when you're looking at some recent data about children who are in school, the first 8 days of September, 91 kids were admitted to the hospital. When you look at that, this is there is some serious action that has to be taken now. And I think that it was very clear in the president's remarks that, and his follow-up remarks as well, that he's had enough, that if we are going to move the ball forward on this pandemic and on finally getting out of this pandemic, we have got to step up the vaccinations. People have had a lot of time. I heard Dr. Adams talk about how folks need to communicate and educate people about getting vaccinated.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of time to learn about the vaccines, and there are a lot of people, me included, who are vaccinated. I have not grown a third eye. I'm still here. So it's really important, especially too, because we're looking at our economy and we're also looking at schools.
Right.
And frankly, you don't have to get a vaccine. You can be tested weekly. Most people are probably getting tested weekly because their children are out of school right now. So we've got to find a path forward. And frankly, I also think this gives political cover to moderate governors because they can blame the president for this and they don't have to do anything like encourage people to go out and mandate it.
Speaking of the politics here, in your opinion, was it good for him to show that anger yesterday?
Are you asking me or Abdul?
Either one of you, but I'll start with you, Laura.
Well, I think his anger.
I can see the president's frustration, Phil. I can, because once again, we're kind of at the point now where everybody who wanted to get vaccinated has been vaccinated. The folks who wanted to wait for FDA approval of the Pfizer drug, they've got that. And so now we're sort of in those outliers. And also got to remember, too, that 95% of the people who are actually in the hospital for COVID-19 are people who are not vaccinated. So his anger, I can see that. But once again, my issue is I'd rather the government not have to do this, not have to go down the route of mandates, and people hopefully would be able to be doing it willingly. But like I said, I can see why the president's upset at all this.
To that point, Laura, he said, what was it, like a month and a half ago, he said he wasn't going to have any mandates in regards to this.
Yeah, he did say that. When you look at where we've been in the last month and where the cases are, I mean, we just aren't going to get out of this unless we take some drastic action to either up the vaccines and then also up the testing. I think another key point, too, that Abdul is also sharing here when he talked about the president's anger is I think that there's a lot of people who are in the silent majority who are feeling that anger as well. There's even polling that's out there showing that people who don't want masks in school are in the minority right now. But they're the ones who are showing up. They're the ones who are getting the headlines because they're making the biggest ruckus over the mask mandate. When we know that masks do protect you and keep you safe. I will say as a parent, I get an email probably every other day from my child's school notifying us of another COVID positive case. And we're also putting teachers in tough situations too. And one more point on this.
Yeah.
The Indiana Department of Health this last week, you may have seen it on social media, the Indiana Department of Health put out a graphic showing, to Abdul's point, that the overwhelming majority of people who are in the hospital right now, who are taking up that ICU bed that you're not going to get if you have a heart attack, are people who were not vaccinated.
Right.
The vaccines work, the masks work. If
we could talk about that all day long, right?
Yeah, we could.
But we have to move on here. Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita says that he may challenge it in court. Would that be a smart move for him or a misstep? Abdul, I'll go to you on this one.
I think it's a smart move politically because it helps Todd with his base. Legally, I don't think they have legally, I don't think they have a leg to stand on. So they've done the research. This is through OSHA. Congress gave OSHA that authority, and it's going to take an act of Congress to remove that authority from OSHA in order to turn it back. But like I said, politically, it's a smart move. It helps the base. Legally, I don't think it helps.
Okay, Laura, the governor says that he opposes a federal mandate. Is the governor mishandling this?
Well, I really think that the governor has an opportunity here to really draw a line in the sand. We have businesses in this state, such as Cummins, who are not bringing their employees back to work because of the pandemic. You've also got Lilly and Roche, who are mandating their employees to get vaccinated. I think that the governor could probably find a middle ground. He's not running for re-election because of term limits. I really feel like he has an opportunity here. His Department of Health, Dr. Box and Dr. Weber, have really been sounding the alarm bells in case you've seen some of their press conferences and the materials that are coming out of the Department of Health. But he's got the bully pulpit, and I really hope he uses it.
Abdul, 30 seconds, close us out. Your reaction to the governor's handling of this?
I think Eric has done fine. I think Eric has done well. Could have done things a little bit differently. Yes, hindsight is 20/20. But he's following the science, he's following the data, and that's what I expect my governor to do.
Fair enough. Laura, Abdul, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Take all Indiana politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. We have much more reaction to the president's push for a vaccine mandate online right now at wishtv.com. It includes our interview with Senator Mike Braun. Stay with us later this morning for the Colts season opener. Anthony Calhoun and the Emmy Award-winning News 8 sports team getting ready for Countdown to Kickoff. That starts at 11 a.m. right here on Wish TV. And we'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. This weekend marks 20 years since the 9/11 terrorist attacks. We leave you today with a look at the memorial to the Hoosiers who died that day 20 years ago.